about chord theory, which we can't really get into without scale theory or key theory as well. And really that just means how do we make keys? How are they constructed? Let's jump into it. So the first thing we need is we need to know all of our notes. So I have got all of the natural notes in green here and the accidentals are in black. You'll notice I have stacked the notes like A sharp and B flat on top of one another because they are inharmonic. That just means if you are on your fretboard and you're playing an A and you move up one fret, you would probably call that note A sharp. And this, if we're doing this in a vacuum, you have sharped the A note. You've taken it one fret higher, one half step higher. If you keep moving up to the B, but then you come down from the B, you would say you have flatted the B note. So now we are playing a B, and we have flatted the B, and we would call it B flat. Now, there's a lot more to that. This is if we're only sticking with this concept of taking an A and moving up from it, or taking a B and moving down from it. There are keys that contain A sharp, but we don't call it B flat. There are keys that contain B flat, and we don't call it A sharp. And that's really just so we're not confusing sharp and flat notes and using both of them at the same time. That is another lesson. All we need to know is that we have 12 notes here, and if we go from left to right, we've got A, and then we have A sharp or B flat, we have B, there is no B sharp or C flat, so we go right to C, and then we have C sharp and D flat, we have D, D sharp and E flat, E, and just like B and C, there's no E sharp or F flat. We do have an F sharp and a G flat though, and a G, G sharp and A flat after that, and then we would just get back to A sharp, B, etc. would be in the next octave. We would have reached the end of what is called our chromatic scale, where we're playing every note from A until the next A, and we could repeat that cycle. So now that we know how many notes we have, and we don't have to guess what our pool of notes is, we can say, all right, well, let's make a key out of it. Let's take some of those notes and filter them down into 7 notes, plus the octave, but it's the same note name, so we have 7. This is called a key formula, and this one is the major key formula. So what we do is we pick a note, and if you've watched a couple of my other videos, you know that I like the natural notes for teaching. So I have picked C as the note that we're going to start on, and I've kind of plugged that into this formula. So what we do is we pick a note, and this formula says in order to make a major key, you need to move up a whole step from that note. All right, well that'll give us a second note. From that second note, you're going to move up another whole step. And before I get too deep into it, a whole step on your guitar is 2 frets. A half step, which we're about to get to, is only 1 fret. So we're really only dealing with 2 or 1 fret increments when we're creating this key, which will give us, when we're using the key formula, which will give us this scale. So, and I have to say, for the most part, the words scale and key tend to be pretty interchangeable. I like to think of the formula as the key that unlocks the 7 notes, which will become our scale. Those notes then also can be used to make chords and are still considered the key, but it helps my brain to kind of separate the two. Otherwise, it's almost like having 2 words for the same thing. So we're going to use this formula. We're going to use this key to unlock all of the notes that we'll end up with. So we have our C, we've moved up a whole step to give us a second note, a whole step to give us a third note, a half step from that note to give us our fourth note. We go up another whole step to give us our fifth note. A second whole step from there to give us our sixth note. A third whole step in a row now gives us our final note before we take a half step, and we should end up right back where we started. So you see I've done the work for us now. I've shown you that if we start at C and we move up a whole step, we land on our second note and we write it down, so it's D. Whole step from D gives us E. A half step from E gives us F, because remember, there is no E sharp. So if we move one fret above E, we're at the next natural note in our chromatic scale. And then we move up a whole step from F to G. So we bypass the F sharp and we land on the G. We move up a whole step from G, which we talked about will take us through G sharp and into the A. So this will be one fret higher, 2 frets higher, takes us back where we started, in this example of all the other notes rather, but it's just 2 frets higher in the key of C. A to B is the next series we get. If we move a whole step up from A, we get a B note, and then if we move a half step up from B, we end up right where we started. It's kind of like math. You don't always do it right in the middle, but if you do, most of the time you will end up where you started. So you can kind of check your work. If you're in the key of C and you go through these whole steps and half steps and you end up at D, something is amiss somewhere in here, just because you should always end up where you started. That's your next octave. So here's our key of C. Here are the notes that we have derived from this formula that tell us if we want to play in the key of C, we're only going to play natural notes. We're only going to play C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and that's it. And of course we can play octaves of any of these notes, higher or lower, really to any degree that we wish. So why? Oh my God, why did we do all that? That already sounds convoluted. Well, it's because if we don't know which notes we're using, then we can't really make the chords. So if we don't have a pool of notes to use for our chords, for our chord formulas, then we have nothing to go on. So we've taken all of these 12 notes and we have filtered them down to just 7. And the 8th note here just takes you back to where you started. So again, it's the octave, it's the same note name. We have 7 unique note names in our major scale and in all of our other scales. So then we take these 7 notes and we can start to turn them into chords. So I've already written this out, but we'll walk through it. If we want to make a major chord, well, this one's very simple. We don't have any editing to do. We don't have any changes to make. We're just going to take the first, third, and fifth note from our key, and we're going to plug them in. Plug them in on the guitar, plug them in on the piano, plug them in on our piece of paper. However we're working through this, we're going to find a C note. This is number 1. And then we're going to find our third note, which is E. We're going to find our fifth note, which is G. And then we know that our C major chord is going to be only comprised of C's, E's, and G's, and it can contain any amount of them. As a matter of fact, if you play the C major that you know on guitar, you're going to play 2 C's and 2 G's in that chord, and only 1 E. Sorry, that's not correct. You will play 2 C's and 2 E's and 1 G, because you're open, your high E string is open. So C, E, and G is our C major chord, the first, third, and fifth note from our key. Okay, that's it, we've done it. But what if we want to make other chords, like a minor chord? Minor chord is also the first, third, and fifth note from the key, But that third note is flat. This is a flat symbol here. So what we end up with now is a C, and we are going to flat the third note. So now it's an E flat instead of an E natural, and a G. So we are, at this point, I don't want to get into this too much because it's not always true based on the chords, but if we were to play this C minor chord, more than likely we would be in the key of C minor, because this E flat is not in our major key. But in order to make a minor chord, we have to start with major and work our way in. Now, I say that loosely because you could write out the minor key formula, which is different, and find all of the notes for C minor, and you could do a very similar thing. But I tend to find that if you find a major key and you work with those notes, it's a little easier to get everything else to fall into place, because you have your 3 unaltered notes to start, and then you can determine which ones are going to become flat, or in this case, maybe which ones become sharp, or which others we're going to change. So this minor chord is C, the first note is the same, and G, the 5th note, is the same, and all we've changed here is the E. The E is now flat. So this is the qualifier. This is the note that makes this chord minor, is the third, usually called the flat third or the flat 3. So when you hear people talking about the flat 3 or the flat third, they're probably telling you you're playing a minor chord, or maybe you're in a minor key, or you're taking something that was major and maybe you're going to flat that note to transition into a minor sound, or to give it some sort of chromatic feel, maybe like a blues walk down or walk up between major and minor third. That's pretty common in blues. Still only dealing with these 3 notes, but now we have an E flat instead of an E. And again, the formula is what makes this all easy. So if we have these notes to work with, we just say, all right, great. Whatever the first note is, we lock it in. Whatever the third note is, we find it and we flat it. Whatever the 5th note is, we lock it in and we get a new 3-note chord, a new triad. Okay, there are plenty of other types of chords. The 4 that I've written here are major, minor, augmented, which is also a type of major chord, and diminished, which is a type of minor chord. So let's get into those. If we want to make an augmented chord, we follow a formula again. We're going to pull the first note from our key. So we pull the C note. We're going to pull the third note. No sharps or flats here. Everything is the same. So right now, first 2 notes are the same as our major chord, C and E. But now this 5th note, which will always be the G, we're going to sharp. We go sharp 5 in our augmented chord. So, and usually augmented, you'll either see, if this was a C augmented chord, for example, you might see it written like C plus, it's a plus sign. Or you might see C aug, A-U-G, something similar, C augmented. And these tend to be the 2 most common. You don't really see C sharp 5 or something like that, because usually that would indicate that you're adding a note that isn't already there. But really this is just a C chord. This plus tells you it's been augmented. The 5th is sharp. Same with the abbreviation. So now we have a new chord. We've got a C and an E, and the G is sharp. We call it augmented. Okay? Let's work our way down to the diminished chord, which you usually tend to see this little degree symbol. So again, if you look at a C diminished chord, you would see the letter C and then this little degree symbol. You may also see an abbreviation for the word diminished, just like you would for an augmented chord, you may see something like C dim. It's a weird angle here, so excuse the handwriting. This is C with a degree symbol, which you tend to see, or C with the word diminished. Diminished. So the diminished chord is the first chord where we have two altered notes. We have a flat third, just like the minor chord, but now the fifth has also been altered, and it is also flat. And this is what makes the chord diminished. When you get into intervals and you talk about major, minor, augmented, and diminished, or perfect, or unison, or all these other terms, the fifth note, whether it becomes sharp or flat, the terms used are not major or minor, they are augmented or diminished. So what makes this an augmented chord is the sharp 5, the altered fifth, which normally would be a perfect note, rather a perfect interval from the root note, and a diminished fifth is a flatted fifth, and vice versa. So the same is true for a sharp 4. So if you have if we had a chord here that if we were playing in say like Lydian, I believe it is, and we had a sharp 4, the 4 would also be augmented. So sharp 4 and flat 5, technically inharmonically the same, with different functions. So here we're still dealing with 1, 3, 5, and that gives us the C. Of course, the 3 we know is the E, but it's flat here, and the 5 is the G, but it's also flat here. So now we have C, E flat, G flat. That's quite the chord, because now it's two notes that are completely different from the original triad. So we have the major chord, C, E, and G. Sounds very standard, very bright, very correct, very consonant. We have the minor chord, a little more dark, a little more emotional. We have the augmented chord, tends to sound a little more tense because of the change in the fifth and the distance now between the third and the fifth specifically. The diminished chord, equally the same, has minor tonality, but now the flatted fifth also adds another layer of tension. It just doesn't quite feel right, is one way that people tend to explain it. It almost sounds like you're playing something wrong. But there really isn't anything wrong in music, and that's why we have names for these things that you might not ever find, or you might not ever keep going back to if we didn't know, oh, I'm playing a diminished chord, or oh, I'm playing an augmented chord. So that is the very beginning of understanding chords, where they come from, where they're going, and how it can begin to make sense. You have all of the notes. This doesn't change, at least in Western music. This doesn't change. We have 12 notes, A through G sharp, and then they start over again. 7 naturals and 5 accidentals. We have our formula that tells us how to make a major scale. We have our major key formula. We pick any note. We could have started on D, we could have started on G. We would get different notes, but how we make our chords stays the same. Once we know what our notes are, we pull the 1, 3, 5, we pull the 1, 3, 5, and we flat the 3. We pull the 1, 3, 5, and we sharp the 5, or in the diminished case, we pull the 1, 3, 5, but the 3 and the 5 are flat. There are also suspended chords, there are add chords, there are 7 chords where there are 4 notes per chord that we haven't talked about yet. But this, I would say, is a very good idea to start to think about how chords are made, and why we end up calling them what we do, and how we make sense of it all. So enjoy that, have fun. Hit me up with some comments if you have questions, like and subscribe, and look forward to the next videos. Hopefully this helped you out a lot. I'll see you next time. Take care.